So, despite it feeling like NHL free agency was right here, because it absolutely was, we're gonna kick the can down the road and look at next year's class just to spice things up a little bit instead of talking about the same free agency class for the third week in a row or whatever it's been at this point. We're gonna look down the road a little bit and talk about the insanely stacked class that we have coming up. And I think the fun part with this segment is we're going to do a bit of predicting at the same time as whether or not we think the odds of these players coming back are there or not. I guess we didn't talk about this before. The segment we might have wanted to do this. In my head I was thinking we just put it on three options. We'll keep it simple. It's the same thing as any survey you would have ever taken in your life. It is I think they're going to leave 50-50. I don't think they're going to leave. We'll do
Okay.
it like that.
Okay.
It's the same thing as when you're doing a survey. If you're a coward if you do not go all the way in, or but we'll say a 50-50 one because there's a few in here that are like, eh. I won't force a prediction on a few of these. But anyway, I we can start at the top. I say we just make our way down the nice little list we've got here. We are going off a lovely list from Sean O'Leary of The Score, who made an entire article on this entire thing. We cut a few names out because we didn't want to be here for another 2 hours. But we have a list of about 13, so we'll go through all of them. Like I said, I think we start at the top with probably the biggest name, probably in Leon Draisaitl. And there's already been a lot of conversation on this. I don't necessarily know where it landed as of recently. I was following it like right after they lost the cup, but there were some people who were immediately questioning what the chances are Draisaitl decides to pack his bags and leave after this upcoming season. Because at this point, he absolutely can do that. If he doesn't think that the Oilers are the best chance that he's going to get, or hell, if he doesn't want to be on under McDavid's shadow anymore, like there's so many things going on there that leave a lot of questions. I think for Draisaitl. So I think I'll toss it over to you, Caleb, for you to give just your opinion on it as a whole. I don't know if we're gonna jump right into saying what we think is gonna happen, but I'll get throw it to you.
We can set it up a little bit. I think hmm, I think this is a tough one because I'm of two minds here. I think my first thought kind of echoes what you just said in terms of there's reasons for him to want to leave. Um, because the Oilers are going to having just come off the Stanley Cup, having to having incoming contracts for guys like McDavid, guys like Bouchard. Like there's potentially going to be less money. He'll probably get more money somewhere else, just with the caliber of player he is. Not that Edmonton won't be willing to pay him a truckload, but
McDavid's
he's Leon
contract is coming up pretty
Draisaitl.
quick too.
There's going to be like want for him elsewhere that will probably pay him, if only slightly more. And like you said, in terms of I don't know how much this matters to him, the being in McDavid's shadow thing. Um, any other team he goes to, he'd be the number one star. Who knows if that matters to him or not? On the other hand, I do think there's a lot of reason for him to stay. Obviously, just coming off a Stanley Cup. Obviously, you're not going to get the chance. Like, if you flip the McDavid thing on his head, you're not going to have the chance to play with the world's number one player anywhere else. Like, that kind of chemistry. I know they don't always play on the same line, but, like, power play, whenever they do kind of decide we need a spark, let's put Connor and Leon on the same line, like, that's a dangerous connection. Like, that's been proven to work throughout their entire tenure. I think breaking that up would be a huge loss for the Oilers, and probably he probably knows that. The last thing I think is just like you don't let a player of Draisaitl's caliber get away. Like when would the last time have been when we saw a player as good as Draisaitl hit the open market? There's a reason it doesn't happen, and that's
Uh,
because when you have a guy like Draisaitl, you throw all the money you can at him. The Oilers, just looking in terms of cap space, they'll be able to make it happen. Um, their cap space for this year is not looking good, but they're already making room. Like a move we aren't going to end up talking about, the Ryan McLeod trade gets rid of a little bit of cap space. And going into 2025, 2026, this is when the contract would be due. They're going to have they're going to have 25 million cap space. That obviously doesn't include all the contracts because a whole bunch of them will have expired, but it's still enough to get it done. That's kind of my reasoning as a whole, just laying out both sides a bit, which kind of gives away my opinion.
Yeah, a little bit. I think I'm very much in the middle on this one, to be honest with you. I think to reveal my pick, I'd say I'm probably right on that 50-50 spot. I'm probably leaning towards him staying just because of the one thing you said right there, in the fact that it's almost unprecedented for a player like Draisaitl to go to free agency, but it's also almost unprecedented for a player like Draisaitl to have to play under a player better than him for his entire career. Like, there's a lot of things about this Oilers team that is just unprecedented. The last player I can think of going to open market who is comparable to Draisaitl or like would cause the same commotion was I couldn't tell you the year off the top of my head, but the year that Steven Stamkos went to open market and nearly went to the Leafs. That was a pretty good big one. I'd also think John Tavares going to the Leafs. Stuff like that.
Tavares was what I thought.
Yeah, Tavares was the other big one. Like, I think the only reason people don't think about Stamkos in that year was because of the fact that Stamkos didn't end up leaving, but he absolutely did test free agency. Like, there was that period of time for about, I don't know if it was a week or 2 weeks, where there was that conversation of, holy shit, Stamkos might actually leave the Lightning. And obviously it ended up happening this year, but it wasn't as big of a deal as it was this year. Or the year, whenever it happened prior. I think Draisaitl is still bigger than both of those, but I think it is close enough that I would not write it off as not possible. I think there's a lot of things in the favor of, obviously the Oilers will probably do everything in their power to keep him. It just depends on if Draisaitl actually wants, if he wants more money, if he wants to be that best guy, if he wants to be the first one to lift the cup. It depends on all of those things, right? Like, I don't know. I already gave my pick. I think I'd probably, to be lame right off the jump, I'd probably land on 50-50. But, yeah.
Yeah, and I'd go the same if it wasn't obvious with my wiffle waffling and everything that I said. And I'd probably go, like, pretty much the exact stance of you. Like, I think there's a much higher chance of him staying. Like, if I had to give an actual percentage, I'd probably go, like, 75-25, but that's not how we're doing this. So,
no.
50-50 it is.
Yeah.
I do think that the chances are high that he stays, but there is reason for potential concern on the horizon. Not yet. I think it also matters a lot how this season goes, so we'll see.
Yep. If we want to move on, the next one on the list that we got going here, we'll go here, is Mikko Rantanen. With, obviously, he's been one of the big stars on that really good Colorado team for the last little bit. When he first kind of started exploding, it very much came out of nowhere, and now he is absolutely ready for a huge deal to potentially either stay in Denver or somewhere else. He's almost in a very similar spot to Draisaitl in that scenario, where he is very clearly the second best forward on that team and would be the best forward on a lot of very good teams. It just depends on how important that is to him and whether or not Denver will be able to actually afford to keep him. And with the amount of star power they have on that team, with just the overall talent, I would say the chances are it's going to be a little bit harder, because I think they're going to have to maneuver the cap a little bit more than the Oilers will probably have to, if I were to bet, without a photo in front of me of their cap, because I'm not looking at the math in right now. I'm just picturing it in my brain and going, they're already paying Cale Makar. They're all but ready paying McKinnon. They're like, it's one big contract in comparison to two. So at least to me, in my head, I have a funny feeling this is going to be a lot harder to give Rantanen a huge contract than it would be for a player like Draisaitl. But I'll toss it over to you, Caleb.
As someone who does have the numbers in front of them, you're not necessarily far off, but it's not like it's impossible. they have going into like next season. Again, these numbers are going to be inflated just because you look at these teams, they all have like going into next year, they all have a ton of cap space because all those contracts that are going to be coming due are expired, so they're off the books. Um, but they still do have $17 million in cap space. Looking at other players they'd have to re-sign, it's not anything that's too concerning, so they'd be able to focus a lot of that money on Rantanen, and they're not going to need to use all 17 million of it. Obviously, they're probably going to want to have something similar to what he has now, close to 10 million. Um, and yeah, the only other UFAs you really have to worry about are um, like Jonathan Drouin, and not much past that. Georgiev as well, I guess. But yeah, I think when you look at this, it's pretty similar to the Draisaitl conversation for me. Just I don't think there's as much reason to leave. You're obviously still going to get a huge contract elsewhere, but it's not like you're going to be immediately the best player on the team in every single instance. Um, you're still kind of the understudy, but I don't think, but it's not as big of a thing. Like, oh wow, like any other team, he would be the number one. And
On a
I don't
lot
know,
of teams, he'd be the number one,
on
but
a
it isn't the
lot, but
same.
it's not to the same extent.
Yeah, I do know what you mean by that. Like it is definitely a fair point to make. I think the more we talk about it, I am more leaning towards him returning, and I think a lot of that is just the fact that it is a bit different to the Oilers situation, just in how much money I'm sure he's going to end up pulling in. He can't really make the argument that he deserves more than McKinnon, so he'll probably get around the same. So at least they sort of already have a number in front of them on what they want. And the fact that they have 17 million like in cap most likely going into next year, that definitely makes things a lot easier. I agree with you. I think
Yeah.
I'd probably land on the side of he's going to stay, but there's still a little bit of doubt in my head just in the fact of like you never know. When you're looking at a second best forward like that, you never know what's going on in their head, right? Like at least to me, you don't know what sort of ego thing could be happening in the other side. So I wouldn't completely write out the idea of Rantanen walking, but yeah, I'd still say he's probably returning.
Yeah, and I would probably go with the same in terms of saying, yeah, probably returning. I just don't think it's a similar argument you make with Draisaitl. I think even with Draisaitl, if there was no 50-50 option, I would have said staying. I think the more I talk about Draisaitl, the more I talk myself into him staying, and it's a very similar situation. They're just gonna have to pay him less money, which I think even makes it more likely that he'll stay. So, yeah, if I were to pick, Rantanen is probably staying. The other one last thing I'll make for Rantanen, you talked about Cale Makar already being paid. Well, that does give them last cap space to work with. You look at the Oilers, who haven't signed Bouchard,
Oh,
who
good
have their
point.
McDavid extension coming up. Like
Yeah.
that's almost where I get more worried to say like, oh, I don't know, like maybe they have to cut bait on one of them. Whereas with Colorado, they already have him locked up, and they won't be able to
I
do much else after they sign Rantanen. But at least they have enough room to do it.
yeah. I would let Bouchard walk twice before I would let Draisaitl walk, I think. So at least to me, I think as long as the Oilers have their priorities straight on that one, I wouldn't necessarily worry about it. If they're gonna lose one of them, it's probably gonna be Bouchard. Like Bouchard's great. He's a terrific offensive defenseman, but he's not Draisaitl. Nowhere close on the skill side. He was terrific for them in the playoffs, but it was you take you take Draisaitl off that team, or if you take Bouchard off that team, you are losing a lot more with Bouchard. At least to me,
Yeah.
that's the way I'd look at it. But we can move on and talk about Sidney Crosby's chances of leaving the Pittsburgh Penguins for a short 2 seconds. There was already a lot of conversation about him signing an extension now. Like, there's already a lot of talks about it. I am firmly on the side of Crosby's going to retire a Penguin. I don't think anybody has thought anything else, especially with a lot of the Penguins' moves related to trying to basically kick the can that is a inevitable rebuild down the road as far as possible. I think a lot of that is obviously because they want to give Crosby the best final years in the NHL they kind of can, right? And I think just because of that, I'd absolutely say right now, he's staying. Like the rest of these, like with Rantanen, when I say he's staying, I'd give it like a 90%, 80%, right? Where there's always going to be that chance. Crosby, I would almost without a doubt give 100%. It is just so, it would be so unbelievable to see him leave. Like he has his cups, he has his MVPs, he has his Rocket Richards. You done it all. Why not end it on the team where you started it all? Like it's just it. You're ruining like a perfect ending, and I think he knows it, right? Like if he wanted to go to a contender, he would have. He would have already.
Yeah, and I think you just hit the nail on the head with what you said there at the end. Like, don't ruin what you have. End your career with the team that drafted you. Like, has any player in the last like 20 or so years meant more to their team than Sidney Crosby to the Pittsburgh Penguins?
Ovechkin.
Other than Ovechkin, maybe, but they that's always been the conversation, right? Crosby, Ovechkin.
Yeah.
Like that's not really breaking new ground.
Yeah.
I just don't see any world. We've already seen. I think it also helps. We've already seen news about him staying. We don't have to spend too much time on this. If he went anywhere else, it would be a shocker. I'd put it at staying without much doubt on it.
Yep. No, absolutely. I think he is him, and actually, you know what? While we're here, since he's on the list, let's talk about Brad Marchand because he is probably the other one on this list of players who he's staying. Why would Marchand leave? Like the Bruins have had like it would just be so incredibly shocking to see him leave. Like it almost would be just as shocking as Crosby leaving for a lot of different reasons, but it would still be very shocking. He is absolutely the heart and soul of that Bruins team. He is, while not as old as Crosby, I don't believe, he is still on that, like, he's on the doorstep of being done. He's got a cup. He's already won one. I think he would probably already know that his time for it, he's slowly declining. Not quickly, but he is slowly.
He's 36.
Yeah. Oh, so he is the same age.
He's 36.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew he was up there, but I didn't think he was the same age as Crosby. But anyway, it doesn't necessarily matter too much. I think he's probably going to resign for maybe a last year or two with the Bruins, and then that'll be it for him. I would be so surprised to see him go anywhere else.
It's pretty much the same story. Like it's one of those, like, you can look at the cap space numbers, you can, like, analyze it, which, even if you were to, both the Penguins and Bruins are doing absolutely fine in terms of cap space, and it's not like at this point in their career they're going to be getting these huge contracts like a Rantanen and like a Draisaitl. You can analyze it all you want. I just think you have to go gut check. Are they going to be wearing any other uniforms? Does it feel right? No, it doesn't. It's not going to happen.
Oh, I just had a stroke. Did you hear that? I just went Brard.
Yeah.
Brard Marchand. Brard Marchand is the biggest goon and piece of shit in the league on the biggest goon piece of shit team in the league. It is just perfect, and it will stay that way. I say that as someone who loves the Bruins as well, as they are.
I don't, but I don't, and I agree with you. Yeah.
Biggest piece of shit team in the entire NHL, and I love it. So there you go. We can move on. I figured we might as well package those two together because they're kind of the no shit ones. But anyway, the next one we could probably move on, which is another big name, is Mitch Marner. And there's been a lot of conversations around him. He was at one point connected to Utah. I think that was the big team. I think we talked, didn't we talk? We did a segment on Marner. We talked about a couple different places he could have gone. So if you watch that one, you'd be already ready for this conversation that, I completely forgot it. I have to go watch it again, but that's okay. Well, it's fine. Anyway, Marner's an interesting one because of how much high-level talent the Leafs have, especially, and whether or not they're going to want to pay him like the Star and like with the amount of money he probably deserves is an interesting thing, especially with the fails in the playoffs that we have seen constantly for Toronto. So he's in a bit of an interesting spot, but I don't know. It's a really odd one to me. I don't know where I land on it like right away. Because yeah, it's such an odd one. I have a hard time imagining that he'll get traded. We talked about that during that segment as well. It's just the fact that a player like Marner is very hard to trade. Like if you're gonna move him, you're not gonna get something that is the same level. Like you're losing the trade no matter what, unless
Yeah.
one of the draft picks you get turns into something incredible. You're gonna lose the trade right off the jump. You're losing the trade. But yeah, it's an odd spot for Toronto to be in. It's a odd spot for Marner to be in. I don't know. At least I'll toss it over to you so you can give your opinion as well. But it's at least to me this is a really weird one.
I don't know. There's no way he's coming back, right?
You don't
Like
think
if we're
so?
just talking about if you're just talking about free agency, I mean, we're already talking about like, oh, he's going to be traded already when the season hasn't even started yet. I think the fact that there was that much rumbling about him being gone before he's even hit his free agent period. Oh yeah, he's gone. I mean, the Leafs already are kind of in cap hell anyways. I don't know what their I can pull up their numbers right now. In terms of what their projections are going to be. Yeah, they're bumping up against the cap right now. Um, if we look at their projections, well, they have more than I thought. They have 24 million, but again, that's without a lot of contracts.
Yeah.
Um, again, Tavares being another big one. Matthew Nyes, like I think that's another big thing. Jake McCabe is another big one. I think that's something that's really important to look at when it's like, oh, these teams have so much cap space. It's looking at what other players are coming due. The only reason the Leafs have that much cap space is because Tavares and Marner are both um, going to be UFAs along with some other key players. Like you're going to have to pay Matthew Nyes a lot more. That's going to get bumped up. Um, you're going to probably have to pay Jake McCabe quite a bit more. I don't know. I think you look at all of that and you say there's not going to be a lot of room for Marner if he wants to come in with the big contract. And I don't know, like you pointed out the playoff performances. People are already wanting him to go just to change it up and because he hasn't performed in the playoffs. So I think if they aren't able to find a trade partner, I even then have a hard time seeing him coming back. I think the Leafs will be moving in a different direction at that point.
Yeah. No, that's a lot of very good points. I think and to reference the article we're looking at here with and where we got this list from, I think the point that they made, a really important point to bring up as well, is I think a lot of his future, I think it's all if it isn't already in a really really bad spot now, it I think it pretty much gets determined by how far they go in the playoffs next year. Because if they
Yeah.
can make a run at it, next year truly is their last chance with this squad, right? Like, people were talking about it this year. Like, is this it? Is this like them losing to the Bruins in the fashion that they did? Is that it? Are we finally seeing this team that struggled in the playoffs so bad for so long finally try and restart? And I think the quick answer that we're seeing is no. But if they do it again next year, I think without a shadow of a doubt, Marner's gone. I think if they lose in the second round next year, I think Marner's gone. If Marner wants to be a Leaf, they have to go conference or further. I think they're like hell, maybe even finals. If they don't make the finals, I feel like there's still a good chance he's gone. Because it's just such an odd spot where like there just has been so little success for that team for so long. It almost just becomes of like, sure, you're a great player in the regular season, man, but I don't want to pay you $12 million to lose to the Bruins every year in the first round. Like that's no fun. You're selling me
Yeah.
tickets, but you're not doing shit other than that. So I think, yeah, I do agree with you because of my hate of Toronto and because I believe there'll be a first round exit. Long after I'm 6 feet in the ground, I would say that yeah, I definitely am landing on the side of yeah, he's gone.
Yeah. And I think one other important point to put in this, um, with the amount of dissatisfaction that Toronto fans already have with Marner, I think that is also important because yes, they'll have room to re-sign Marner even with re-signing Matthew Knees, re-signing John Tavares, re-signing Jake McCabe, but they will hamstring themselves so far into the future and not being able to make any other moves to sign any depth guys. Like I just think at that point as a GM, you're going to say, hold up, I already have how many like $10 million contracts on my team? And the fans already want this guy gone. Hasn't been performing, already been trade talks. I think they'll probably try to trade him at the deadline, and if not, I don't know if he's coming back. I'm leaning towards leaving.
I mean, you hear the stat every year as well of like all of these. Whenever like teams make the finals, it's just like neither of these teams are paying someone over 11 million or whatever. Like you always hear it, right? Like you gotta wonder if that's starting to perk up in Toronto's year.
I mean,
like
except this year.
except this year, yeah, that's true. But in previous years, it's been pretty. Florida is kind of like the big. And we're gonna. It's a big reason why Florida is probably not a team that is going to repeat, because of the fact that in the next 2 years they're gonna lose a lot of players that they just can't pay, right? Like, and that's gonna be a big thing. And I wonder if like that's a thought in the Leafs' head. I don't think. I don't think I look at Florida as a fluke in that sense. I still am a firm believer that you can't necessarily pay 4 players like $14 million or whatever, right? Like you can't do that. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I think I'd say no. I'm guessing you're kind of on the same page on that one. We're both going to land on no.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well we can move on. We might want to pick up pace is what I'm thinking, cuz I think those are like the real big ones. Those are the ones worth having a long conversation about. I still think we can still chat about all these, but why don't we'll skip the order a little bit just to jump around and stay with the Leafs. Let's talk about Tavares, because he is the other big player who you brought it up when you were talking about the salary cap there. He is another odd one where frankly we just don't really know. Like it feels like we just haven't heard a lot on Tavares with whether he wants to come back, whether there's been any contract talks. Like it's just there's just not really been as much. I think you'd probably be able to get him for less, which is the nice thing. Realistically, you probably aren't signing him to the same deal that you signed him to back whenever he first came to the Leafs. So, at least to me, that's nice, I guess. But if you are going to spend over 10 million on one of these players, it's probably going to be Marner. Realistically, I'd probably give the money to Marner. It's just whether or not it's how much Tavares actually wants, and it's whether he even wants to come back. Like I think it's both of those things to me.
Yeah, I see it as less of an enigma. I see it as I'm 100% sure he's staying. I just don't see why you wouldn't, because while the Leafs' future is uncertain, even you, Simon, like have to admit they are still a good team and a good roster. So it's not like you're going out and like maybe you're trying to chase a cup if you're Tavares, but even then I don't know.
But
I think the fact that
to toss a question at you, if they bring him back, how much do you think they're going to pay him? Like how much are you paying?
Near the amount, nowhere near the amount that he already has.
But I
think
is nowhere
even
near?
he's probably fine with that.
What do you think?
Well, he's at 11 million. He's at 11 million right now.
Yeah.
I think even taking like a $4 or $5 million pay cut off of that.
Oh,
like,
I thought you were going to say
think that's
4 or
realistic.
5 million just period. I was like, holy shit.
No. Pay cut.
Yeah.
Pay cut.
Yeah.
Like,
I'd say
I think he would be fine with that. I don't think he's going to get that much anywhere else either with his age, and like he has not been the same guy. I also think it is important to remember the free agency decision he made last time he was on the market. There's a reason he went to Toronto. It's his hometown team. Like, I think he loves playing in Toronto. I just don't see any reason for him to leave at this point. Especially if we play out this scenario where we say Marner's probably leaving, then you have the space for him, even if you're not giving him that full pay cut. I don't know. I think it is going to be a lot less. I don't see a lot of reason for him to leave. I just don't see it. It doesn't make a lot of sense in my head. I feel like he'd be the kind of guy to take a hometown discount either way. Yeah. I just does not make a lot of sense for me for him to leave.
Yeah, fair enough. I think I do sort of land in the same spot for you. I do think he's probably coming back, but I think I still think he probably could pull 7 million. I think he could pull 7 million for a lot of teams. Like I still think the fact he's a leader. He's 33, sure, but I think like a 2 year, like a 2 or 3 year $7 million deal. I don't think there's a lot of contending teams that would pass on that, because it's a very similar thing to bringing in a Tarasenko or like something like that, right? Like I think there's a lot of teams that would be up for that. But I do agree with a lot of things you said there. I think that is important context, because I think you're absolutely right. If Toronto wants him back, I'm sure he'll come back. But I think the money is important too, because he's not going to sign for $5 million. Like, and if he does, that'll probably be a whole heck of a thing, right? Like, it is the odd thing, because I just don't think. Yeah, I don't know. It is just an odd spot for Toronto and Tavares, frankly, because of the fact of the lack of success, a whole heck of a lot of things. A lot of fans do want a little bit of change. Like, there's a lot of things that either need to or probably will change in the next little bit. And I could see Tavares being one of the people who ends up being victim to that. But I guess we'll see. I'd say Tavares I would put at... I'll say he's staying, but similar to what you said about the Draisaitl thing right off the jump, staying, but like I'm probably 75% sure. 70.
Okay. I'm more sure. I think I don't see any reason why he'd leave at this point.
Yeah. I still think he'd probably want a cup, and at this point, like, how confident can you be that Toronto's going to be the place you get it, I guess? Right? Like, sure, it's the hometown dream. He wants to win his hometown a cup, but like...
Yeah, I don't know. With that roster, I know the Leafs' history, but I don't know if you're going to find any better roster. Like, cup chasing can only take you so far. There's a difference between going from a team like San Jose and being like, I need to chase a cup, I need to get out of here. From a team like Toronto and being like, I got to chase a cup, I got to get out of here. It's not quite the same thing. Because you're going to be going to a roster that's just as good. I know there's a history, but like I don't think you're going to have that much of a better chance anywhere else.
Tavares signed for $7 million anywhere else. No one's going to give a shit about him. He signed for $7 million with the Leafs. Leafs fans are going to be rioting. They're going to be like, why the hell is this guy back? Like, it's that type of thing as well. Like, the fan base is just insane over there. Like, I understand. It's the hometown thing that really like hits the nail for, especially for like a guy like Tavares. But you got to think, like, what would a man like that do for a little bit of peace and quiet and maybe a cup at some point, right? Like, that's kind of what I'm starting to wonder, where it's just like, who knows? Who knows? Maybe that's not the thoughts he's having, but like, it's at a certain point, like, you're not going to win a cup with the Leafs. Why not try somewhere else? Like, sure, even if it is an equal team, it's not an equal culture. Like, you're going to a team that more than likely will give you probably a better chance to succeed, honestly. It'll be better chance to succeed, probably less toxic fan base. Actually, not probably, definitely. There is almost nowhere else in the league you could go that would have worse. So at least to me, I look at it kind of like that, where it's like, I could totally understand why you'd want to leave, frankly. Like, it's a chance for him to get a fresh start as well. Like, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of people on that Toronto team that I wouldn't blame for wanting fresh starts, right? It's just whether he actually wants that or whether he's still chasing that childhood dream of bringing a cup home to Toronto.
Yeah. I don't know. You make good points. I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, we can keep moving down the list. We've kind of jumped all over the place, but to wrap up the forwards, we'll do that. We have 2 left. This is gonna be an hour-long segment, but we can kind of run through these ones, I think, fairly quick. Brock Besser and Verhaeghe are the 2 we have left. We'll talk about Brock Besser first. He had a very strong season for the Canucks, which was, in a way, sort of a bounce-back year, as he didn't really have an incredible season before that. He, obviously, early in his career, he gave Canucks fans a lot of hope when they weren't very good that he was going to be that next big player for them. It didn't really end up happening, and then boom, in this big Canucks seasons for them as a whole, he was able to get a 40-goal season and bring back that production that basically gave gave them a lot of reasons to want to bring him back. I don't think without that 40-goal season, I think there'd be a lot bigger, there'd be a lot more questions about this one. I don't really know on this one, to be honest with you. I feel like, to give mine right off the jump, I feel fairly. I don't know. My gut's saying he's leaving. Honestly, like that's it feels like a hot take because we haven't heard anything about it, but it's the type of thing where like they already have a lot of people locked down, and it's gonna be really interesting. I want to say 50-50, but I feel like I've said 50-50 too much, so I'll lean towards he's leaving.
Okay. I am going to go 50-50 here. Because I think if they're going to, yes, they already have everybody locked down. I don't necessarily think you're going to have to pay Brock Besser to the extent that you're going to have to pay some of the other guys we were talking about earlier, like Rantanen.
He's
like
probably
he's
an $7 or $8 million player, at least.
Yeah, and that's a raise on what he's getting now, but not by much. They'd be able to do the reason for hesitation, I think, is their cap. Their cap is rough. 13 million next year, so they have the ability, but you also look at players like Pia Suter will come due, Niels Höglander will come due. Then you look to, I think the big one is not like this upcoming year, but the year after that, where you have both Connor Garland and the big one, Thatcher Demko, coming due.
Right.
That scares me a lot, to where I'm like, ooh, like I don't know, are they gonna have to cut bait on him? But I don't know. I think that he is one of your key players, and he is very young still. He's still only 27. I think he's got to get another contract there. I'd be pretty shocked if he didn't. But because my gut is saying he's staying, but like everything else around it says, like I'm like, maybe he's not. So I lay him somewhere in the middle in terms of 50-50. The one thing I will say that I don't need to waffle on is, oh my God, that Jake DeBrusk contract looks so bad now, considering considering how cash strapped they're going to be just to keep everybody in place the next couple of years.
Who on earth would have taken Jake DeBrusk over Brock Besser? Like,
and that might be the decision they have to make now. Isn't that kind of absurd?
Yeah, it's also the fact that like I almost wonder if maybe they're just like hiding something. Like maybe they already know that Brock Besser's gone, it's that type of thing where like they already have like some inside information of like they know he's not coming back, so they're like, instead of trying to trade him or anything like that, this is them, or who knows, maybe they still will try and trade him, but like this is them kind of covering their own ass in a way, like getting a player who, sure, on surface level is a flat line, you're paying him the same amount, but if you gave that deal to Brock Besser, I'd sit here and go, yeah, fair enough. Honestly, you're locking down a guy who's a 40-goal scorer. He's a hell of a goal scorer, and he's a guy who already has really good chemistry with your stars. You bring in Jake DeBrusk on that contract, and I sit here going like, that's a lot of money for a player who isn't on the same level as Brock Besser, at least to me. Like offensively, I don't think he's anywhere close. Defensively, sure, you can have that, but it's like, I don't know, it's just not the same to me. Like it's just such an odd player to give $7 million to, when you have another guy on your thing who knows, maybe Besser wants more than $7 million. I'm saying $7 million as an example. Like we don't know what's going on, but it's like you just don't. You never know, I guess. Yeah, you never know.
Yeah. You never know. I think that's the big thing for this one. It's really going to be hard to tell. I think we'll know. I think this is another one where this upcoming season will be huge. I can see if the Canucks have a big season where he's like motivated to come back, maybe he takes a little bit of a discount and is just really motivated to re-sign. Or it could go the other way, where he has a huge season and then he gets his paycheck is raised and he goes somewhere else. It's 50-50 depending on a lot of things, including how next season goes.
Oh, absolutely. I think we can move on though to Carter Verhaeghe, who is currently on Florida. This one is going to be really, really weird, at least to me. I don't know. He's a very, very skilled player, and he was a big part of their cup win. But it is the fact that we did bring it up. Teams don't generally win the cup with players over $10 million, right? Like, that's just kind of the thing. It's a stat people have tossed around. Florida is the one, like, they are the one outlier, and I almost feel like that's going to start to bite them in the ass when it comes to re-signing a lot of these guys. And I wonder if that starts with Verhaeghe. That's the question that I immediately kind of throw out there, because he is a guy who I could see getting, I don't know,